Good evening and welcome to Spindle TV. I'm your host this evening, Laney Shaughnessy, and I hope everyone's doing well. Thank you for joining me. Now, before I get started in class tonight, last week we had some audio issues to where the audio was trimming in and out. I've got sitting here in front of me, I got a backup microphone. I need you guys and girls to let me know if my audio starts acting up. We'll try not to let it do that, but um, seems that sometimes uh, it goes out, and I don't realize it. And we're hoping that it doesn't do that tonight. But if it does, I have a backup microphone here that I can quickly switch to, and it should clear it up. I think it's in the microphone itself. I've got a new one ordered, but we'll have to wait and see. So I'm going to need you guys and girls to, and I'll keep an eye at this time. Usually I'm like, when I get into the zone of designing, I kind of don't get to see the comments until I look over. But I will watch them, appreciate it. I'll watch them closely and everything. And, um, you know, and I do understand that some, audio issues could be on the receiver side, their speakers or headphones or this and that. But last week it was on my side, so if it happens again, I'm gonna take it, one stride at a time. And I got a backup microphone I can click right on, and we can move forward. Um, the thing that kills me is when I'm wearing my headphones, I can hear my audio, and I never hear any distortion. The audio is perfect all the way through. But it doesn't matter what I hear, it matters what you, ladies and gentlemen, hear. So just let me know if there's any audio issues. I had one commenter on last week's video said the audio in and out was driving him so crazy he had to stop watching the video to keep his sanity. That's not a comment that you want to read. Anyway, all right. So I just wanted to get that out of the way and everything, and we'll get started here. Gotta love those invisible cans. Okay. Not last week. Last week we did the flag case, which is underway. I'll get the files and everything. I'm going to try to create some plans for it. So if you've been looking on the description of the video for files and all, I'm trying to put together a nice set of plans. And in order to do that, I'm actually building it first. I haven't finished it yet. And then I'll put some plans together for it, and it'll be in the description. So be patient with me, and I'll get that done. But the week before, I believe it was, we were modeling a handle for this knife. And don't worry, it's not sharp or anything. It's still flat and dull. It's just a blank. But we were modeling the handle for this knife that a knife maker gave me and everything. And we got somewhat, a decent way into the layout and design and all, but we didn't get very far in the finished product or the modeling and stuff. We were talking about different things. So what I want to do is I want to briefly recap on where we're at and how we got to where we got to, as far as we did in that last video. And then I want to take it to the next steps to the finishing and things. So with that being said, let's get started. Let's get all righty. We can hide that little box there. All right, so I am in Vectric Aspire this evening. Aspire, is the required program for doing the modeling and all. And as a brief recap, if you recall, we started out with an image that was brought in, and then these guidelines here were to scale it up to size. So I could scale that image up to size so I could actually model off of that image itself. And doing just a bitmap tracing, a bitmap trace, wasn't a very good option due to the lines and everything weren't very clean. So it was a matter of just using our drawing tools, such as our curve tools, our line tools, and things, to manually go around and trace out the knife blank, and then go into node editing and kind of clean up the curves and stuff. And what we ended up with when we did that were some different handle layouts and things. And the handle tracing, which is this red line here, was kind of the initial outline. And if you recall, I told you that, I took and offset that red vector outward about a 16th of an inch. And once I, did that, that offset, that's this black line here, I was able to kind of start laying out the vectors the way that I wanted. Um, and we can go ahead and get rid of the image now. We kind of know what the knife looks like and stuff. But and let's get kind of front and center here in the outlines, and let's turn off this one right here for a minute. From our original red line, I cleaned up the lines and everything. Our original red line is this one, and I ended up kind of cleaning up the curves a bit and then offsetting that outward to create this offset outline all the way around. And from there, I could kind of start building the models using the Aspire's Create Shape tool. And when we initially started, let's get into here. Let's switch over to 3D view for a moment, and let's kind of get in close and personal there. When we first started, we ended up with a kind of the base of the knife. And if you notice, the base of the knife is missing a part here. And it was kind of an area where kind of that was going to be recessed down for where the fingers were going to go. And that's kind of this here. So that outline was the layer one here. Wait, what is it? Model trim vector. There we go. I called it the model trim vector in my layers because I wanted to be able to trim that anything that was out here of that model away to kind of create a blank space. Because these lines here, if we turn off all the vectors for a moment, turn off all of these lines here, these two rails, this one and this one, and this profile here, I wanted to be able to build another component that was going to be recessed a little bit lower and kind of blend in. And if we looked at the second component that we created, um, this is that part, that lower part that's kind of recessed out. And then from there, we started looking at different types of ways to lay out the handles. I had some decorative vectors that were some different flourishes and things that we were going to use. We started kind of laying things out that, let me see if I can pull up the proper. Oops, way over here, there, dude. Way over there, dude. Let's see here. That was the handle. That was All right, it's gonna be. All right, are they hiding from me now? There we go. Model design vectors. I even got my stuff confused. We ended up kind of creating this crosshatch, right? Created this curvature in this crosshatch and everything. And I even commented during that part that I wasn't really keen on that crosshatch. If you remember, if we open up our original design, kind of remember our muse, our design muse that we were going to use. Let me see if I can pop that open real quick for us. Let that open up. This was, kind of our muse, kind of the design pattern and everything. And I made comment that, more so than the crosshatch, this design here looked more kind of like a lattice, a lattice work. And the spacing and everything was much different. And so as I had a chance over the last day or two, I kind of looked at, all right, if we do this crosshatch, which notice how the vectors are drawn because of the way that the overlapping lines were trimmed and created. Notice how the vectors are kind of drawn. We have overlapping lines, and that's fine for the crosshatch. But because this vector, let me ungroup this, and let's get in here and ungroup it. This vector here, instead of being one of this squares where I could do, I could create a model component of this square with these squares underneath it, and kind of create that last work. When it traced, it actually created these individual segments. And it wasn't ideal. We modeled it and everything, and it wasn't ideal. And then of course the curve of this lattice work did not really again, it wasn't appealing. There was going to be some trim work, of course, where it goes into that lower level and all, but it just wasn't. I wasn't feeling it too well. So what I ended up doing was I ended up coming back on the 7th, a couple days ago, 2 days ago, and I ended up recreating some vectors. And if you'll remember, if you don't remember, refer back to the first video. But this was one of this little vine here was one of the designs that we had drawn using some of the different flourishes, combining them together, and we had it laid out. Well, I ended up keeping that in the design and then just mirroring it over to this side. And when I mirrored it, I had this kind of void in the middle, and I was like, "Man, what could go there? What could go there? What could go there?" And since this is going to be a display knife, and not really for use and all, I thought, well, heck, I'll just kind of create a little medallion, if you will, with 2020 on it, and that would be the handle. But then when I did that, I still had that crosshatch kind of underneath, and I wasn't feeling it. So let me come in here and let me take these vectors. There's a few of them uh, hiding. Let me see. Where's my little guys? Okay, that's good. I'm going to move these, right click and move to a new layer. And I'm just going to call this my vine layer. I don't know what to call it, but vine vectors, right? We'll just call it that. And I'm going to make it invisible to turn them off for a minute so we can kind of look at this crosshatch. And so what I ended up doing was on the handle itself, if we come back in and turn on the handle trace, our red layer here, and I'll turn off the models for a minute. Um, this is the overall handle, even with that lower level, right? This is the red line is my overall trace. And so what I ended up doing is I ended up creating a kind of an outline vector of if I was going to put some kind of design or pattern in there, where would it fall? Where would I want it? And I wanted it kind of wide on the front, narrow on the backbone of the handle, and then, just kind of fitting in somewhere that it could fit, around the pinholes and stuff of the handle. And once I got that layout, you'll even see that it actually comes out even further than the handle because we, doing some trimming and stuff. But I then offset that vector inward about I think it was about a 16th of an inch or a 32nd. Let's take a measurement here and let's see what my spacing is. And I'll just do a vertical measurement somewhere right here. So yeah, a little over a 16th of an inch offset. And when I did that, when I created that offset, I knew that this inside area, this inside vector, let me select it here, was going to be where I wanted the lattice work within, and then the outer area here was going to be kind of a frame, right? Kind of a border, if you will, between these two lines here. And so once I had my offset and I had everything drawn, then I started kind of creating rectangles. And this time I created the rectangles individually instead of kind of drawing them uh, and doing a trim to where it created those odd shapes like that crosshatch did. I ended up drawing the rectangles individually, and making them really long. I had them kind of going really long so that I could rotate them in different angles and see what orientation I wanted. And to give you an example um, of how I, got to here, let's say that I took a rectangle, and my first rectangle basically was going to determine kind of the width of these little lattice ribs, if you will. And then from there, I held down the control key, put it in transform mode, and I held down the control key, and I drug out multiple copies. Um, and I didn't care what the spacing that I was dragging them out was, because I'm going to use the vectors to do the spacing and everything. And so as I pulled them out and reselected them, oops, I want to drag that one around. As I selected all them, I was able to kind of move them into position and then, somewhat rotate them how I like, the angle that I wanted. Once I got, the angle that I wanted, I then used another rectangle to create a border and kind of where I wanted these things to be spaced between. So my other rectangle basically kind of outlined, this area here. And what that allowed me to do, let's make it just a little bit bigger here. A little bit bigger here. What that allowed me to do was to select all of my smaller rectangles first. Hold down the shift key when you're selecting more than one item. And then select this rectangle border last. So select that last. And then I could use my alignment tool to align to the center, right? So right now, inside that last rectangle, they're all stacked on top of each other and they're centered. And then I was able to come down here and space those selections either horizontally or vertically, and spacing them horizontally gave me an appropriate amount of spacing, right? So this rectangle here was just to kind of create the general area, because I did one side at a time. to create that general area, and then it allowed me to create an equal distance spacing between those ribs, if you will, whatever you want to call them. And then from there, I was able to delete the uh, the rectangle that I didn't need anymore. And I'm going to take these just for a minute. We're going to put them on a new layer from scratch so you can see the outline. I'm going to take this one and I'm going to take a copy of this one. And here, let's do this. I'm going to move these to a new layer. And I'm just going to call this sample to delete. That tells me that I need to delete it later. And this one, I'm going to copy it to that layer. I want to copy it. I don't want to change it. And so if I came up here and turned off, all of the layers except for that sample to delete, I now have a kind of a boundary that I could trim these to. And once I did that, the first thing I did was to make sure that, oops, moving my guideline around, which is no big deal. First thing I did was, kind of stretch these out. Let's grab it by the corner here. Stretch these out so that they at least clear this boundary in some way or fashion or another. And then by selecting the outline last, I could then come into my trim tool. My trim tool, not the trim with the scissors, not the interactive trim, but the trim tool. And I have two options. I can clear outside of the boundary or inside of the boundary. Now, the last vector that I selected, or that you would select if you were designing something and all, the last vector you select is typically considered the boundary, and so this area here is my boundary. So if I cleared everything outside of that boundary away, it would then leave, redraw those and, create that inside kind of lattice work. And then the process, that process was repeated. This time, going vertical or horizontal, sorry, and holding down that control key and dragging, just a series. However many you have, if I would have had more, it would have been less spacing, more spacing, because it's going to space it based on, how many I have and all. And once I had those selected, I could then kind of, well, let me do this one more time. Select all of you and then click on you. There we go. I was able to kind of get them into place and, kind of create the rotation. And I'm not worried about what's outside, the ones that are outside. I'm looking at the ones that are inside, the ones that are going to be left when they get trimmed to the vector. And so I don't care, I have a lot of them there, but I'm going to end up doing my spacing, but it just kind of gives me an idea of, how things would lay out. And then I come back in and draw a rectangle, and I could have saved the other rectangle. I didn't have to delete it. I could have used the same one, but that's okay. And once again, the rectangle does not have to clear the parts. It's kind of like where you want to space, what's that spacing area you want to space in between. And then the same process, I would select these ribs first. Those are what I want to align, followed by the outside vector last, the one I want to align to. And using the align tool, I could once again center them. They're all stacked on top of each other and centered. And then I could space again, either horizontally or vertically. And in this case, it'd be vertically. So kind of create that spacing. Once I had that spacing created, again, I can get rid of the rectangle. Don't need it. It's just there for layout purposes only. And then I could select my vectors, and select my boundary last, right? My outline last, and then use my trim tool and again clear outside the boundary. And that kind of created my lattice pattern. Not kind of, it did create my lattice pattern, right? Now, I ended up doing that, throughout, and I didn't have any cross pieces in here. I had a few, but not many in this thin area. But I ended up rinse and repeating the area over here as well. So I had kind of two different patterns, and because of that, if we come in and let's turn this off and look at the vectors that we've got here, you'll notice that my spacing here between these slats and everything is much wider than the spacing here. And the reason for that is because this is wider, this is narrower. So I wanted to kind of give that feel that it was being constricted, right? It was kind of being squished, if you will. Imagine if this was scaled up to the same size as this, that spacing would be, it's kind of a visual optical delusion, right? If this were stretched out to be the same size as this, then that spacing would be pretty much the same. But with it being constricted or squished down, then it's kind of makes that spacing look compressed, right? So that was kind of the intention, and I think that it pulled off pretty well. Now, if we look at the models, if we go into our view here, and let's turn on some layers. There we go. In those layers from our model base, there were some individual components. So let's turn off this bottom one first. And let's zoom in nice and tight so you can see what we've got here. Okay. So each of those rectangles were selected. I grouped them together, this group and that group. And then, these were ungrouped. I ended up ungrouping those. But, in doing one section at a time using the create shape tool. And in here, notice, the create shape tool, it was simply basically just a flat shape with a height of 0.26. Okay. And let's come in here and let's turn off these models here. One more. There we go. So it ended up creating these flat shapes here. And if we look at all the sides going all the way around, and one more. Now the handle is upside down right now, but that created kind of this lattice work, and let it kind of regroup. Well, when we create these shapes and everything, these models or these components, if you will, they're super thin. I mean, they're only 0.025 inches thick. 20,000 of an inch thick. Not much. 250,000, and they are super thin. So at this point, once they're created, they've got to get some kind of base to them, some kind of meat to them, and that is done by creating a draft on the component. And when that component is, when you're creating a draft, your draft angle. Basically, it's kind of adding more meat. It kind of brings out a slope. Uh, Typically, you hear the term draft when you're doing when you're creating molds, especially for plastic injection molding and stuff. Your molds have a draft to them, so those injected parts can slip out easier. They have a bit of an angle to them. Well, the way I use the draft in the Aspire software is to give my models some meat or substance to them. And for the draft of these parts here, I used a 22.5 degree draft for the part. And so what that does is it it puffs out the bottom at an angle. And let's kind of look at this from the top. And so now my ribs have some substance to them down below. Now all this meat down below, I'm not concerned about, because that area is covered by the handle and everything. So when that this handle here, this part here also has a draft. They're going to get, it's going to get covered by that, and then they're going to be raised up just high enough to where it looks good. Now, this model, if I come in here and turn this off, if we look at component 8 was a lower component, and component 7 was the outline. Remember I said that in my outline here between these two lines, and let's turn these off for a moment, these vectors. This outline here between these two lines, that is basically this outline frame all the way around here. So let's get this into kind of full view, and it's upside down. I modeled it upside down and stuff, but so it creates that view. And even though my little ribs, even though their draft is hanging out, down below and everything, that's not a problem, because this is the inside of my handle. When my outside handle comes into play, right, it puffs that edge out, right? I put a 30-degree draft on that. And so now I have this insert, right? And you're like, man, boy, that sure is thick and everything. Well, you have to remember, this is the whole knife handle, right? All of this lower part, probably about maybe an 1/8 of an inch or a 1/16 of an inch below the top surface, is all going to be covered by the handle parts, so you're only seeing this upper part here, right? You're only seeing this upper part. And then of course the draft, right? This draft here that's hanging out, that's going to get cut away. We would come in to our 2D view, and we would actually come all the way back up in our layers, or I would, because this is how my layers are. And on my handle trace here, that vector, that red vector there, would be used to remove, using this tool over here, clear the area of the selected component, right? This component, the model, clear the area of the selected component outside of that selected vector. So anything outside of that selected vector is going to get removed, right? So I'm not worried the way it looks funky here, because the draft, right? That draft kind of pushes it out, from the handle and everything, but all of that is going to get trimmed away. And so once I had all the components laid out, I was then able to create kind of a copy of them up into what's called level 2 over here. And let me see if I can pull this out much more. So you guys can we can focus on it for a minute. So level 1 was all my master components, all my individual models together. Okay. And level 1 is where I create my masters. And then if I need to make any changes throughout the program, then I can always go back, right? I can go back. But in order to do the trimming, in order to do the smoothing and things like that, then the model has to be baked together. And if I bake them together, that takes all those individual ingredients, all these ingredients here, and puts them into one, like baking a cake. And once it's baked, all those ingredients are one. And if I were to have baked my originals, then I wouldn't be able to step back and edit any one of these individual components if I needed to. So all these components were copied up into level 2, and then they were baked together. And the bake tool is this guy right here. And so if we turn off level 1 and hide all of those components, and we have our blank slate, if I come back in and turn on level 2, and let's not jump ahead here. On level 2, my main handle, first of all, without the decorative ribs yet and all, were baked together as one. So this is the baked component. And actually, this was created during the last class and last video, that level 2 and everything. And then there were 2 additional components created to go with that. So let's look at what those additional components are. And these additional components were basically a kind of a pillow top, let's see if we can turn this off. Let's see if you can see that closely again. Let's kind of get flat on it here and zoom in. So the main handle and lower level were flat, right? Well, the component here was to create basically just a small little curvature to it. And I say small, it added a bunch of meat to it and everything, but it's just a small curvature. I'm not worried about this here because, up in later in the process, I'll scale everything down to the appropriate size and all. And then, those components were then brought up into a new level, and I'm using levels as kind of a growing tree. I have my originals protected and all separated down in level 1. And then as I move up in levels, I'm kind of creating, in a lot of cases, my handle base, right? That's the same consistent component. You'll notice handle base. So, it travels up the tree, and then all the newer stuff is getting added to it as we move along. And so, from level 2, if I come in here and turn off level 2 and then we jump up to level 4, notice there's no level 3. Level 3 was that crosshatch that didn't look good. I ended up deleting that. I didn't like the way level 3 looked. But jumping up to level 4, we once again have our handle base. Okay, and this one is baked together with the new ribs that were created. So if we look at it and notice that there's no overhang, everything has been trimmed to that outside vector. Let's see if we can, I'll scale this window back down to there so I can focus in here. But now we have our handle base, and then we have the new little lattice work, if you will, and border and everything, added to that. And then it was trimmed. It was cleaned up and trimmed to my initial outline, that red line, right? And now from here, it was time to start trying to add additional components. Now, the one component I did steal from level 3 before I deleted it was the little vine component that we had made in the earlier model in the first class, a couple weeks ago, and everything. And when we first were creating it, it looked weird, and we never really finished it up. We only had one side. We didn't have the other side, and we had this vine that was created on top of a crosshatch that really just didn't. It wasn't appealing and stuff. So if you by the end of the first video, when you see what the model was created, it was looking okay, but it wasn't meshing well. It wasn't bringing together. Um, and so, but I did borrow that component again, and that component was just a create shape tool using that vector outline of the vine, and it was an angled shape with a 30-degree angled profile, or curved profile. Let's call it the right name, curved profile. This one's the angled profile. Curved profile with a 30-degree curve, kind of like it creates a little pillow top, if you can see that little curvature and stuff. It had a base height of 1/4 of an inch. And with, the reason for the base height is because that's how tall my actual handle is. From the bottom of that handle to the top is 1/4 of an inch. And I needed that base height underneath this curved pillow top to push it up, so that it's, raises it up and it's sitting on top of the model that's below it. So I had to give it that base height to push that model up. And once that, that shape was created, it was then mirrored over to the other side. And if we look at, let's kind of get up on its side here, and let's get up close to this. You'll notice that this model is bigger than this model. So it was mirrored to the other side, and then it was scaled down. I sized it down using the size tool, and just kind of sized it down to where it would fit more appropriately on this side, than it would here, because in its original size, it was hanging way out here, and everything. And so once I got it positioned and rotated, the way I liked it, I had this big void here, and I thought to myself, well, what in the world am I going to do there? So I ended up creating that little circular shape, and adding that in between here. So it kind of created a little bit of a medallion, if you will. That's something. It could have been my initials if I wanted to put my initials there. It could have been, it's real small. I mean, I could have done, like if I was giving this away as a gift, or as a, 50th anniversary, to my club, whatever the case may be, right? I could have put whatever I wanted in there. But what I ended up putting in there was the date, 2020. And now you'll notice that there's another component here called model with 30-degree draft. This model here, as it's created, once again has those straight vertical lines, right? It has those straight vertical lines and everything. And I wanted it to have some flair as well. So when you do a draft, it recreates the model and it adds the draft to it. So this component here is the same as these two, because it's the model with that draft. And so if I were to turn these off, because I don't need them on, to hide those things. If I come in here and look at the model with the draft, then you would see that now those vines and this disc have a little bit of an angle to them, and it's a 30-degree angle to it. So it kind of gives them a little bit more meat, angular meat and everything. And the now the last model in level 4 is component 12. That's where I created the model twice. This one needs to get deleted, but I thought I would show it to you here. This is where I moved things around, and notice how it's blurred, right? There's 2 of each and things. So component 12 here doesn't belong. So I'll delete that now. I didn't delete it. I wanted to talk about it in the class. Basically, I created those vines and I moved them around a little bit to see which would look better and all that stuff. And I ended up sticking with what I had originally. So now I've got these vines. They're really they're flared out now. And once again, those flares would have stuck out past the handle, right? So if we look here, they would have stuck out past the handle and stuff. So once again, I did the clear tool and trimmed them up to my handle outline. So everything was trimmed up to that outline and all. Now, on the front here, if we kind of tilt this a little bit, my front vines are bleeding into this lower part, and I kept that. I liked the way it kind of flowed into that and everything. So I did not clear, on this outline, because I do have another vector outline that goes to this line here, and I could have just cleared that model and deleted those. But I kind of like the way it flows, like it's kind of growing through this kind of raised level and everything. So I kept that element, that design element. All right. And so, these are the steps that in the progress of getting from one to another. So now, level 4, once that was, kind of created and I had my individual components, then I was able to, let's turn off level 4 here. Was able to create a new level and kind of bring everything up into, that new level, level 5. And in level 5, let's turn off component 15. Level 5 was the same model, right? All of level 4 baked together as one, keeping my originals intact, right? From the lower level. And the originals for the lower level is, my base, that's level 1, right? We know the whole base is level 1, but the 13 and the 14 and the model draft, that's the vines and this area here, right? So those are, separated. So they come up into a new level. And you don't have to do this, guys. You can do everything on one level, but this is my progression. I try to be able to make it for myself to where I can step back in my design at any time to make any adjustments or changes necessary, to achieve what my end result is going to be. So I create those individual levels, and I'm just moving what's below up to the next level, baking that part together, and then building on top of it, right? Then take that level and move it up to the next level, bake that together, and build on top of it until I end up at the finish line of the model that I've created. And for me, level 6 is my final hurrah. Now on level 5, the only thing that level 5 was the angular. So if we go back into the create shape tool, and let's go into our 2D view for a moment, and let's turn on blade, knife outline, that, and let me find my other vectors here. They're hiding from me. There we go, my vine vectors. Laney, you just put them on a level called vine, or a layer called vine vectors, remember? So in here, I've got the numbers 2020, and I tried to come up with a font that was fitting, that had a little bit of sharp edges, but also a little bit of curvature to it, and also it kind of blends in well. And that font, on that font, an angular shape was created with a 60-degree angle. which ultimately created a recess. It was subtracted from this model, so it creates that, 2020. Now, on this here, on the 2020, I have a choice. I could create the shape like I did, right? That angular shape to where it's kind of part of the model. Or if I don't think that my ball nose bit is going to give me a nice cut because this model, when it gets cut with the ball nose bit, that ball nose bit has to fit into all these areas to get this detail, right? So I'm going to be using a 32nd inch tapered ball nose to get as much detail as I can. I'm going to try my best because we're going to create the tool pass here in a moment. But if I feel that my ball nose bit is not going to do justice to the 2020, then I can simply create a V-carve toolpath with my 60-degree V bit and get the same result. And it just carves on that part of the handle, right? I can do a V-carve toolpath and achieve that same result. But in my level 5 here, I created the model. I created the shape. It gave me a choice. I can either do it this way or I can V-carve the 2020 in, right? Either way. They're both going to look the same. But if I carve with my ball nose might not do a good job. It might not get into these tight areas and things very well because even at a 32nd inch radius, it's going to be hard pressed to get into these nice sharp lines and all. So I made the decision before, class that yesterday when I was looking at this design that I'm going to end up V carving this. So there's going to be a V carve toolpath on these vectors, right? So I'm not going to use that part of the component. So let's turn that off and hide that part, right? We don't need that. Now that I had the handle and everything kind of laid out the way I thought, looked decent, I really wanted to put it together, right? I wanted to see, okay, let me get a visual of what all this is going to look like um, with the knife, right? So I ended up coming in and I ended up taking a complete outline of the knife and creating a component, a model of it. And then, if we back up here for a second, and let's turn on the image again. On this knife, it's got, the sharp part of the blade is here. We've got kind of this curved recess and everything, and then it kind of curves into, the backbone of the knife, whatever you want to call it. But, I wanted to, when I created the flat component here, it didn't have that curvature in it. So then I had to take it a step further with my vectors, and let's turn off the bitmap layer here. And I had to come in and draw new vectors for the blade. I had to draw this curve here. And notice they're not connected together because I'm using a 2-rail sweep technique, the 2-rail sweep technique to create that curvature. But I have this rail here and this rail here. So that would be the front of my blade. And then I have this rail here and this rail here would be the back of the blade. And for the profile, kind of created this little curvature, like it's going to come down from that, 1/4 of an inch, 0.22 something, down to a sharp edge, right? And what that allowed me to do is by doing that is I was able to come in and let's turn on level 6 now. And one at a time here. There's my 2020, right? That 2020. I was able to come in and create the component for the knife to kind of create that model on the knife. And now I'm going to zoom out and we're going to turn this knife around 180 degrees. Come on around, come on around, come on around, come on around. And let's get it back on the screen and zoom into it. And so by doing the 2-rail sweep between that inside rail and the outside edge with that angular profile, I was able to create or simulate that blade cut. And then doing the same thing on the back profile between these 2 rails, I was able to come and create this back component. And overall, those components, my whole knife outline was created as a flat blank, and these 2 components, this one and this one, were subtracted from it. So when creating the shape, the combine mode was a subtract. So it was taking the material away to create that blade, type effect. And once that was done, I now had kind of a simulation model, which is not going to get carved. I'm only carving the handles, but I had a simulation model of the knife that I could come in and add the handle to see what it looked like. And then I also transmitted the V-carve 2020, so I could just get a full overview of what was done. And now I'm only looking at half the blade. I'm not looking at the other half. So these 3 models were then copied to the other side, And so by copying those 3 models to the other side, I'm able to create the other half of this knife. And now I can look at it in its, let it regroup here. I can kind of look at it in its entirety to see my overall result. Is there anything I want to change? Now, some people may think it's odd that this slants so far back on the front here. I don't, because depending on how I would handle this knife, my fingers would either be in here or I would grip my index finger over this for a little bit more oomph. But by being able to create that model of the actual knife outline and things, and then put the handle to it, I'm able to, spin this around, look at it at its entirety, and determine if I'm happy with it or any of that stuff. And so overall, I'm happy. Now, the one thing that is going to change is this 2020, which is this component here. That 2020 is not going to be part of the model because I'm going to just V-carve that in. Okay. All right. So that's how, that was the progress and the steps to get up to here. So now that we have a working model, not counting the blade, right? Let's turn that off. That's just there for simulation and viewing purposes. Let's go to the other side and let's turn level 6. Let's turn that component off and the 2020 because that's not going to be part of the handle and all. That leaves me with, my handles. Now, let me switch back over to the other side. These handles are not, I'm not doing a 2-sided project. The only reason I have it set up as a 2-sided job is so I could look at this in a 3-dimensional window, right? That I can look at the whole project entirely. But my knife handles are going to get copied or, cut on one side of the board, of the material. So I'm actually on the bottom side here. I'm going to turn that level entirely off and everything. And, this is my finished handle. Now I'm going to take that handle and that entire component, and I'm going to, let's come in here, and now we're at the part where we're going to start, tool pathing this. I've got layer 1 here. I'm going to rename this to my finished handle. and this is the model component. I'm going to take this and I'm going to come in here and turn off my blade outline, right? Those vectors, and then my knife outline, right? I don't need that. And then I no longer need the handle outline on either. All these layers and different, different steps and phases, that we ended up deleting, right? So I kept it in here for, to be able to refer back to it and all, but that did not look good. I didn't like the way that looked. Um, we had the trimming vectors for when we were trimming out the models to create that lower recessed area. And kind of the area that was going to be raised up and stuff. Uh, the area where we were going to do the two rail sweep, and all of these layers have a purpose. There's some vector, one or another vector on there. The naming, I could do better in the naming, right? You would name it the way, you can organize it the way you want. But each of these layers represents kind of a particular phase in that design. And now, as of 6/7/20 and my vine vectors of today, as well as we'll use the handle trace, and might as well just throw in the knife outline. you know those layers are kind of getting towards the ending of my process and all. And so with all these layers turned off here and everything, what we're going to do is we're going to come over to our layer 6 um, here and go into our 3D view. And we're going to turn off the 2020. I don't want that in the model. I'm going to V-carve that in. So from here, we're going to just go ahead and mirror this, right? So we're going to come in and I'm going to create a mirror copy. And I'm going to flip it horizontally. And all right. And, now I can take and move that copy into place. And I can start laying out. Come on in, Tubbs. You're welcome to come in, buddy. My little doggy. Now I've got the two halves of my handle, if you will, that I can go ahead and lay out on my material and get ready to start tool pathing this. So that's what we're going to do now. And so on the two components, let's see here. While that's selected there, we're going to turn off. And this, you see what happens here when you create copies of things. If you got a certain layer active, it's going to put that model on that layer, right? And if I turn that layer off, bye-bye model, right? So on my selected component here, I'm going to move this to layer 1. Okay. That way I can turn off that layer and it's still there. Now on my other handle, this guy, right? Notice he's missing. So let's go down and turn him on. Let's see, is he on what layer? He's on one of these layers. Bear with me a second here. He's hiding from me too. I'm looking for the actual model to present itself. It's not under handle. It's not under handle trace. It's not under that one. Not under that one. Laney, where's your model at, buddy? And this is why you keep track of things. I lost track of where my model was. Now I got to find it. Watch Vectric punk me and say, hi, it's not on any of them. All right. So with that being said, I'm going to go into my 2D preview and move to front. And let's see if I can do that one more time. Let's see if we can find. I'm going to turn them all on. Once I find my model, then I'll be happy. I bet you it's way up here. You son of a gun. And there it is. It's hiding on the bitmap layer. What are you doing on the bitmap layer? So let's go in here and let's turn off all the layers. And that's what happens when you have a layer active and you create something, a component or anything, whatever layer is active is the layer that it's going to put it on, right? And I must have had the bitmap layer active when I created that component, and so that's where it put it. So we're going to take this component and we're going to move it to layer 1, right? So that way all I have are my 2 components. Okay, so trying to hide from us. All right. So with that being said, now I can, start laying out things appropriately. Now I actually have a piece of maple, so I'm going to change my job size a bit. I have a piece of spalted maple that I'm going to use. And in that piece, it's actually it's not square and narrow like this. It's kind of wide and thick. I'm gonna run it through it's about 4 inches thick. It's an octagon shape for some odd reason. It was cut as an octagon. But it's probably I would say 8 by 8. Uh, 10, 8, yeah, 8 by 8. So I'm going to come in here and I'm going to change my material size to be a little bit more appropriate. And I'm going to be taking that piece to the bandsaw and getting it down to the appropriate size and everything, because it's not going to be an inch and a half thick. My handles, by the way, are each of those models. They're only, let's look at that. Oh, can't do that yet. We got to close one box before we open another as far as the job set up. So let's close that one and open the job setup. So my model in its entirety, let's go into our modeling tab over here and let's turn off one of these copies of our handle base. And let's look at this. And so stand by. My model, that handle is it's less than a 1/2 inch thick from the bottom to the top of it. If I were to go into the properties over here, um, it is actually 0.2905, plus an eighth of an inch. Let's see here, 5, 9, 10, 11, 2, 3, 4. Yeah, 4155. Vectric is telling me, hey, it's over here, dumbass. You don't have to add it up. Okay, so that's how thick my handle is, and all that wonderful stuff. So I definitely don't need to be carving it out of an inch and a half thick material, right? I just created the inch and a half because I wasn't sure exactly where it was going. So I just made the model thickness, whatever, whatever it was. But going back over to the job setup, now I'm going to kind of lay out my board or my material based on what I'm going to be cutting it out of. So the material is 8 by 8, and it's kind of an octagon shape, but that's okay. Let's go 8 by 8. And I'm gonna run it through the bandsaw and resaw it down So I will most likely resaw that. I'll most likely resaw that down to. I'm actually wanting to try to get as close to it as possible, but I'm going to go 0.5. I'll resaw it down to a half inch, and then what I'll do is um, I will cut that part out of that half inch material, and then I will take it over to a sanding bed, and I will sand the underside, the flat side of it down until I get the right thickness that I want for my hand. My hand, when I put both pieces on, I'll get them, sanded down evenly. If I have a sanding belt, right, or whatever, I'll run them and get it, shaped to my hand. And so my piece is going to be 8 by 8 by a half inch. Now it's going, I don't need to see the preview anymore, but it's technically a single-sided job, but that's okay. I'm going to keep it as a two-sided job, but I'm not going to be using side two. I want to keep it on two-sided job in case you guys and girls have questions. I can flip back and forth between the two sides. So 8 by 8 by half inch. I will be using the machine bed as my Z0. For those of you that follow me regularly, you know that I use my wasteboard as my Z0 position, and I start from the bottom left corner. And I'll be, I'm not flipping this, so it doesn't matter what I have here. But when I do flip a two-sided job, I flip it along the y-axis. So with that change, I want you to notice something here. You see my model resolution? You see that extremely high, 8 million pixels? Well, you don't get that option when you just click create a new project, right? At the beginning of a job setup. You have to hold your shift key down to get the two extra options here. Whenever I'm modeling, I always model in either extremely high or maximum. Maximum when I need, super, super detail and all, but generally as a default, I kind of go with the extremely high. But when I'm modeling, when I'm creating a model, like my knife handle here, I work in a very high resolution because any pixelation in that model from a low resolution is going to translate to the quality of the cut. Okay. So if you're modeling, you want your resolution to be high, high, because any pixelation in that model, and let's say you're selling that model or you're giving that model to a friend or whatever the case may be, or you're using it for yourself, any pixelation in that model is going to translate into the quality of the cut. So when you're modeling, you want to model with a very high resolution. All right. So now that I have my job change, my job size change here, I no longer need my guidelines that are visible. So I'm going to click on this little square over here after it finishes setting up the job. And I'm going to, this little corner here, and turn off those guidelines. And then I'm going to take this model here and get it into position. And I'm going to try to minimize my waste because I may be able to use this other part, even though it's octagon shaped. I got to be mindful of that, that there's, a virtual corner that I've got to make because I work from the bottom left corner. I got to remember that, there is no corner. It's cut into an octagon shape, 6 sides. I don't know why they cut that blank like that. And, some would say, well, wouldn't it be smarter to work from the center? It would, but I have a fence that I use that I reference up against, for this edge and this edge on my table. And so I'll be able to hit my fence with this edge and hit my fence with this edge to get it square on the table. And then at that corner is going to give me my virtual center point, or my corner point where I zero out and everything. So, and it never changes on my table. So I don't need to work from the center. Now, if this would have been round, different story, right? I would work from the center. All right, let's go into our models and turn on our other copy here. Right, and let's get that copy selected and moved into place and all. And I could rotate it, or however I want, to do my best to minimize the waste as I can. I'm just going to kind of create some spacing here. And then whatever's left over, I might be able to make something out of it. And I may adjust this when I go out to the shop to run this project. I might look at my piece and say, you know what, they would actually look, along that grain because it's burl. It's going to be, it's a maple, a spalted maple. Sorry, it's a spalted maple. Um, no, it's actually a spalted maple burl. And so the way the spalting goes, I might want that pattern running a certain way in the handle and stuff. The grain's all over the place. It's a burl. But I might want that spalting pattern to run a certain way so it kind of looks somewhat intentional. So I may be rotating and moving these pieces around in my design and recalculating my tool paths, when I'm out in the machine, on the fly. I might make that adjustment in everything. I may even take a picture of the piece that I'm going to carve. And in my preview, I can import that picture. I can add a new texture and import that picture so I can see the picture in the background and carving on it. And then that might help me decide which way I want to lay out my handles to carve for the best look. And that's one of the cool features about being able to add your own background photo, JPEG, PNG, things like that, and stuff. So I'll give you an example. This walnut 3, is a picture of a piece of walnut that, was imported. Not the best picture, low quality. Make sure it's high resolution. But, in this case, if I was, bringing in any of spalted maple, I could, add that in there and I could carve out of it, right? So let me get back to maple here. All right, so for right now, this will be fine for the layout. It's going to change. I know it's going to change based on how I want the piece, but we're going to start here. And let's get that rotated back. And I'm ready to create my tool paths. Now, these parts are 0.4155 inches thick. There is a little bit of rough cutting to do, but I don't think my 1/4 inch bit is going to fit into a lot of places. So I am going to do a 3D roughing toolpath and see if like an 1/8 inch bit or something can get in there and kind of hog away some of the waste material. If it doesn't call for it, then I'm just strictly going to do a finish. But you got to understand the finished toolpath, a 3D finished toolpath, it rides at the lowest depth of the model. I mean, it's cutting the full model. It doesn't take passes. So it raises up and down according to following the design. So it doesn't take multiple passes. It does it in one pass. So if we can do a roughing toolpath to hog away the waste material, when appropriate, then cool. All right, key thing here is to make sure that my models are properly positioned in my material. So when my material setup opens up, we'll do that. All right. So once again, a recap, I'm cutting out a 1/2 inch thick material. I'm going to start from the bottom left corner for the XY datum. And I'm using the machine bed as the Z0. And now my model. So my material is a 1/2 inch thick. My model with the model Z plane is it's 0.4155. That's my model thickness and all. My model Z plane is 0.845. That's how much material I have left from that 1/2 inch, when that model gets cut. Well, my model's not flat at the top. There's a curve to it. My wood is flat. So what I want to do is I'm going to put about 10,000ths of an inch of that material on top of the model. You can go a little more, but I usually stick around 10,000. So that way that it mills off that 10,000ths before it starts shaping the model. That way that will eliminate the possibility of flat spots in that model cut. So by putting 10,000ths of an inch above the model, that leaves me about, a little over a 1/16 of an inch below it. And then again, my model's here, this light tan area. Once I get it all cut out, then I will, based on my hand and when I have these two parts on the blade, on the tang and stuff, I will be sanding that flat bottom away by hand, doing that fine finessing. I'll be running it on a sanding belt or a little sanding pad. I usually have a 8 by 11, sanding sheet on the desk, the workbench, and then I'll just hand sand it back and forth and kind of remove that material slowly until I get that nice, feel to it, right? Um, and my model, if you remember, it's a little bit oversized on the parts, so there's going to be some fine, sanding all the way around this edge to trim it up to the actual knife itself, the curves of the knife and all. So 10 thousandths above, that's going to leave me a little over a 16th of an inch, 0.0745 below, and then my model somewhere in the middle. And so that's my material setup for the cut. Now I can come in and I can start to create the tool paths. Now I'm ready to start tool pathing. Now that I have the material set up, I'm ready to start tool pathing. So I'm going to do a rough cut. And I'm going to use, I'll select an 1/8 inch end mill because I know a 1/4 inch is going to be just overkill for it. These small handles. I'll use an 1/8 inch end mill, and I even have a 16th if I needed to go that small, but let's see what an 1/8 of an inch will do for me. We'll hit select on that. And I'm going to use just the models as the boundary. Okay. But I am going to let that 1/8 inch rough cut, I'm going to let it kind of relieve some of the material around the edge here. So I am going to let it go past the model by its diameter, by 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to leave a little bit of material for the finishing bit to do its job. 40 thousandths of an inch is a default, and I'm going to do a Z-level raster, so I'm not doing an actual 3D raster where I'm actually carving the 3D model with the end mill, doing a rough cut that way. A Z-level raster is flat, and it's just taking the areas that it can get down to those lower levels, kind of removing some of the waste. And I will be, rastering along my x-axis as a default, and so we'll go ahead and calculate that. And it says the allowance left on is greater than 20% of the tool diameter. Leaving a large allowance slows down the toolpath calculation time and may lead to finishing tool breakages, right? And so what it's saying is the allowance here, it's 20%, greater than my it's 20%, it's greater than 20% of my tool diameter, right? So it says, hey, take a, by leaving that, it could, cause breakages on, on the finishing tool. And I'm like, okay. And I'm going to let that go as it is. And then, if I want to reduce that and leave, a little less, then I could. But it's kind of preparing me saying, hey, when you're doing your finishing toolpath, if you're leaving too much material because, it's greater than 20% of your roughing bit, you might want to think about removing some more material to prevent, breakages of your finishing tool. Because, some finishing tools, like especially like a 36-inch tapered ball nose and things like that, they get, very fine at the tip. All right, so let's look. And so really the rough cut, the only areas that it's going to do is kind of that area where I allow it to go past the border by the 1/8 of an inch. So it's basically kind of an outline, but most of the area it's removing is that lower level around the front of the handle, right? So there's not a whole lot of um, material that it's removing. It's just kind of roughing out that general area and stuff and everything. And all. And so now we're going to come down to my finishing tool path. And, if I were to use my 16th inch end mill to do some rough cutting, or maybe if I reduce my allowance to a smaller amount, it might remove more of this material, but there's not a whole lot that's removed. If you see from the very top of the model to here, there's not a whole lot of material, so it's actually doing what it should be doing. If I reduced the allowance, then what that's all that's doing is it's going to be taking more material away. It'll allow the toolpath to calculate faster. As you see, it's kind of going across um, and everything. And let's just see how much more material will be removed by that. Okay, so some more, not a whole lot, but some in all. And I'm fine with that. That's good, no problems. All right, so now the finishing toolpath. This is going to be, for me, I'm going to use, because I want to try to get the best. These are small handles. They're not very big. So I'm going to use my 32nd inch tapered ball nose. And I'm going to, because I want to be able to try to get the best detail as I possibly can. And all. And, we'll go ahead and select that. I'm going to use the model as the boundary. And in this case, I am going to let that bit go beyond the model once again. And I don't have to let it go very far. So I'll let it go past the model by half of what I let the end mill go to. So a 16th of an inch. I could even go a 32nd, because it's a 32nd inch tapered ball nose. I could just go the full diameter. But that's fine. I'll let it go past that. And I'll let that calculate. Now, while that's calculating, it won't take very long to calculate, but while it's calculating, now's the perfect time to ask questions if any of you have any. So we'll let that calculate out. And for those of you that are talking donuts and everything while I'm trying to teach class, I'm starving now. I'm like, oh man, a Krispy Kreme donut or something like that would be awesome right now, right? Dunkin' Donut. That's all I was thinking about while I was trying to explain this stuff to you guys. Thanks for that. But now there's still one more toolpath, or two more toolpaths that have to be created, right? We have our V-carve toolpath, for the 2020. And we have our profile cuts, okay, that are going to get cut out. So while that's calculating, now's the time, literally, and it doesn't have to necessarily be questions about this. If you have any just general questions, we can take an open Q&A while this calculates, and all that. So because once this calculates and we preview it and we do our V-carve toolpath and our profile toolpath, then that's done. Okay. All right. So if you had to go back and edit a level 2, let's say, will it update the upper levels, or will you have to redo the other levels above level 2? So yeah, when you're stepping back, you're deleting those components, and you're stepping back to that level and making your adjustments, and then just moving it back up, and recreating, whatever it was you changed. So that's why in my levels, you saw that I had my handle. My handle was a consistent all the way from level 1. It was, moving up, but then each level had an extra step to it. So that next level was the ribs and the vines and things. I'm sorry, the ribs. And then the next level was the vines, and the next level was this. That way, if I had to step back, I'm not having to step back a whole lot, right? And I can, if I had to change something in level 1, my main handle and stuff, um, then I'm basically kind of getting rid of the things that it's going to apply, that it's going to change, that alteration that I'm going to make down below, whatever it's going to change up here, I'm going to get rid of that. I won't delete it until I'm done making the changes, right? But once I make that change and everything, then that is going to get moved up to the levels, and then what I have up in those upper levels that don't belong anymore, they're going to get removed out. They'll get deleted out. So it doesn't update the other levels. What is the proper way to set up a roundover bit toolpath? I have a white side 1572, and I always have a little lip after I run the cutout toolpath. That's a great question. So while that is calculating, let's minimize that down, and I'm just going to jump into VCarve Pro for this little part here. And let that calculate its thing. Where's my VCarve Pro? And so the question was, what's the proper way to set up a roundover bit toolpath? Okay. Now the white side 1572 is a new job here. It's a 1/4 inch radius, 1/2 inch diameter roundover. And so I'll just we'll leave that blank there. The white side now, the white side 1572, it's a roundover, but it's a bead bit. It's a pointed roundover bit. So it has a kind of a flat tip on it. So let's draw that out. So it is got a cutting overall cutting head of, let me get down to the specs. It's a 1/4 inch radius, 1/2 inch diameter. So 1/2 inch, 0.5, got a cutting height of, I don't know what the cutting height is. It's not showing me. Bear with me a second. Let me back up one page here. Dum, 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 dum. Cutting length, 1/2 inch. Okay, so 0.5 by 0.5. Let's get that in there with a radius of 1/4 of an inch. And let's drop that there. Let's go into node editing, and let's cut the vector here. Cut the vector here. And we'll delete that. And then over here, the overall height, cutting height, is a 1/2 inch. And this is, if I were to measure this vertically from here to here, is, a 1/4 of an inch, right? So let's get rid of that 1/4 of an inch. My straight line here, I'm going to draw a line straight up a 1/4 of an inch. Okay. And then I'm going to join those two vectors together as one. And then I'm going to come over to my tool database, and we'll go new form tool. And it's a 2-flute. Now the pass depth is the depth from the bottom of the bit to the top of the curve here. So 0.25. The step over is typically, a 1/3 of the bit. But in this case, we want to step over the width here. when when we're doing the step over. And so 33.3, let's see here, 1/3, let's go 50%. There we go. And we'll click apply. Let's see, this will run 24,000 divided by 20. All right, so we'll add that in. And now let's create a toolpath. So, oops, hold on a second. Let me take a rectangle here. Imagine we're rounding over the edge of our material, and let's get this to be a square edge here. What we want is we want the step over of the bit, because when we do a profile toolpath, you're by default, you're outside right, the right side of the bit, it's cutting on the outside of the bit. Well, we want an allowance. We want to be on the outside right, but we want an allowance that steps this over, to that inside edge. And so in our case, let me get this over where it belongs. In our case, it's going to be an allowance of negative 0.25. And then the pass depth, the cut depth, is going to be 1/4 of an inch. We want it to cut down to 1/4 of an inch, so it cuts to here, and it's rounding off that corner. If you're getting a ledge and everything, that means your pass depth is too deep, and you're cutting into the upper part of that that toolpath. And that could be pretty cool. But if you're getting that ledge and you don't want that ledge there, which would look something like that, if you don't want that ledge there, then adjust your cut depth to the appropriate cut depth, and that height is 1/4 of an inch. So in our case, we want to do 1/4 of an inch pass depth and 1/4 of an inch step over. So that way, when it rounds off that edge, we don't get the ledge, right? So 1/4 of an inch, negative 1/4 of an inch, we want to step over the line, negative, so a negative number, right side of the bit. And we want to choose the appropriate tool. So let's come over here and add in our bead bit. I have it named an 1/8, but it is the 1/4 inch one. So we'll select that, and we'll select it on that vector and calculate that toolpath. Preview that toolpath. So we get that round over. And then, of course, if we were doing a profile cut, to cut that part out, let's say we're cutting this with our end mill. And we cut that part out. Okay, hold on a second. My material is only 1/4 of an inch thick. Calculate that. And, we can then cut that part out, and, we end up with our round over. So hopefully that answered your question, and all that wonderful stuff. Okay. So once again, I'm kind of in a small screen here. Let me make this bigger. So you have your bit, and the distance from the edge of that bit, the inside of that round over, to the outside edge, that's 1/4 of an inch. And then the height of that curve is 1/4 of an inch. So your profile toolpath would be, 0.25 cut depth, outside right, negative 0.25. Because we want to do a round over. Now, if you wanted a lip like I was showing a moment ago, if you wanted a lip on that cutout, then you would have it step over that negative 0.25, but you would have it coming down to however far you want that lip to be. If you don't want a lip, then your pass depth is 1/4 of an inch, the height of the cutter, right? If I go more than 1/4 of an inch, then I'm going to end up with a lip, and you may want that by design, you may not. So hopefully that answered your question. All right, let's get back to our Spire software here and everything. And let's take a gander at our finishing cut. And while that's previewing in the background on the finishing cut, let's see what other questions we had. All right, and William says the lip is on the outside edge where the tip is cutting. So if that's the case, then your profile cut, you need to move that inward. So if I'm understanding correctly, that from the roundover, let me see if I can simulate this. Let's close this and go back to the 3D view. And I'm going to simulate this by creating a little bit of an offset. Not much. Oh, hold on. Hold on. Gotta recreate my rectangle. All right, reset that back to a blank. Select that. Calculate that. All right, preview all the toolpaths. Now I went 1/16 of an inch, so that's kind of a dramatic lip, right? Let's reduce that. Let's reduce that to hell, I don't know, a 30 thousandths. Let's click calculate and preview. So if you're getting a lip on the on the outside of your cut, then your step over, you can either do it one of two ways. On your profile cut, you need to step it over some more. So in my case, right now, I'm stepping away from the line by 30 thousandths. On the line, it's going to cut. But if you're getting a lip, you might have to come in and, shave off some of that material, of that lip on your profile cut. You may have to create a negative allowance so that, when it comes in and cuts, that it removes, that material and that lip, right? So on your final profile cut, not that one, that's the bead bit. On the final profile cut, uh, you know, you may have to trim it in. You may have to go in the line. But it could also be the reason why you're getting the lip is that you're stepping over too far, you know. You might have you might be saying, yeah, but I'm using 1/4 of an inch. I'm stepping over 1/4 of an inch. Well, if it's giving you a lip when you step over 1/4 of an inch, then back this off some, make it 0.24, or what have you, and all. So, um, that would be my, answer to that. All right, let's get back to our Vectric, and also looking at this with that 32nd inch bit. I'm in a low resolution, so but I'm happy with the quality of that. That'll be good. Now I've got to do my V carve. So in here, I'm going to go into my layers, and I'm going to find my my 2020 here. And I got to get my 2020 into, into place on both of these and all that wonderful jazz. So let me get it into place here. Good there. And then I'm going to hold down my control key and I'm going to drag this one over here. Now you got to understand this is a reverse mirrored copy, right? So we want to make sure that the numbers, if I would have had the numbers in here when I copied and mirrored this over, they'd have been backwards. I don't want them backwards. This is not backwards. It's going to be reading properly no matter what side of the handle I'm looking at and everything. So let's get this into place. Make sure that I'm pretty good where I want to be. All right, and then so now these are going to be a 2D toolpath. Basically, they're a V-carve toolpath, and they're going to get carved onto a 3D model. So when I create that V-carve toolpath, it's important. Um, I'm going to use a 60-degree V-bit. It's absolutely important that I project that toolpath onto the 3D model so it follows any curves or contours of that model. And there is a little curve to this. So I want to project that V-carve toolpath onto the 3D model. Even if my V-carve was up here not on the model, but and I was milling all the material away like a plaque where these were stick and raised up, I would still want to project that V-carve toolpath onto the model because I needed to carve on that lower level, right? So it doesn't physically have to be on the model, for that to be selected. But in this case, it is on the model. And so we want to, carve in that. So no matter which way that knife is facing, right? I'm still reading 2020 the proper direction. Okay. All right. So then that leaves the final toolpath. And for this, I'm going to select both of these vectors here. And I'm going to create a boundary around them. Now I could use the I could use my vectors that I have already, drawn and all, but I've made a copy of this, so it's just quick and easy for me to draw my vector boundaries, right? To have the software redraw them. And I can go ahead and do my profile toolpath. We're going to cut a 1/2 inch thick through the material. I will use a 1/4 inch end mill because there's no tight radiuses in there outside of the cut. Yeah, I'll throw some tabs in there. Let's see here. We'll go 1/16 of an inch thick on the tab, or not, no, hold on. 1/8 inch length on the tabs with a little over 1/16 of an inch thick. I don't want a 3D tab, and I will throw a tab here, back here, and that's really all I need. I'll throw one on the backbone for just shits and giggles, but I'm not going to put any up here because that's lower. All right, so those will be enough, and then we'll calculate that out. We'll cut out our finished piece, with our tabs, and then, we're good to go. Now, notice I did not create the toolpath for the holes, uh, for the holes in the blade. Let's come back to here. For these holes here, I'm going to, I'll use a drill when I put the handle on, and I'll drill appropriately, to get the placement and all. I could use this, but I want to use this because this model's oversized, and I'm going to be sanding this to the final contour and shape and everything. So I'll just drill those out in my 2 pieces, and then in here, I'll drill out the waist, and I'll use a little file or something if I'm going to put that part in there, or it may be covered up by the handle. I don't know yet. You know, it all depends on if I'm going to have a lanyard or something on this, and it's going to be a display knife. So I don't know what I'm going to do with that part yet. So I'm not going to do any drilling tool pass here, and stuff. And, um, so, Blue Knight says, you need to flip that, don't you? So on here, when the knife is facing, imagine the knife blade coming out here, right? It reads 2020. And imagine the knife blade coming out here, it reads 2020. So no matter which way the knife is pointing, the 2020 reads properly. So no. Do you get that? Right? If I have this reverse, you know, with the knife facing this way, then it's going to be reading 2020 backwards. 0202, because I read from left to right. So I don't care which way it's facing. I want the 2020 reading properly. Right. All right. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So that wraps up this project. In the tool pathing, the only thing left to do, of course, is for me to save the tool path and rock and roll with it, you know, and run it uh, and everything. So, um, and you know, that's going to be this handle. So, any questions on this? Those questions you guys did ask, those were great. You know, and hopefully my answers helped you out or gave you some answers. Hopefully, this will. Oh, okay. Yeah, it looked backwards in the other view. The reason why it looked backwards in the other view is because I don't know why it looked backwards. It's upside down, probably. You know, yeah, it's upside down. Yeah, that's the lower part of the handle here. So in the 3D view, that's the right side up. Right. In the 2D view, it looked like that, which of course then, you know, it'd be reading backwards, right? But I had the board spun around that way. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's pretty much it. I want to thank you for joining and hanging out with me for these couple hours. Hopefully you get some detail out of that. Hopefully you like the way this looked. I thought, I thought it was a pretty nice looking little design, you know, something different. You know, we'll see how it goes. If it doesn't look good, I'll make another set, do something different. So Ronnie's always curious about carve time, and that's good that you're curious on that, Ronnie. This one I have a feeling with my 32nd inch bit, it's gonna have a good little bit of length to it. Based on my tools, my feeds and speeds, and everything, we're looking at 3 hours and 42 minutes. 25 minutes for the rough cut, 3 hours and 16 minutes for the finish cut. The V carve is 41 seconds, and the profile cut is about 31 seconds. So 3 hours and 42 minutes. LOL. Oh, hold on. Let's see here. Will you show us the finished knife? Yes, absolutely. I surely will. I will show you the finished knife. I'll post it in the Spindle TV subscribers group on Facebook, as well as the spindle training videos page on Facebook. And then I will also, in the next, live class when I finish the handle, I'll show you the knife uh, in person and all. So I'm also going to be making uh, a little plaque type stand that it'll hang on the wall. So there'll be a plaque with little hooks that the knife will hang on the wall for display. So it'll be a little wall hanging plaque with that knife on it, which I haven't designed or anything yet, but that's what the intention is. So I'll show you all that and everything. All right, now let's see here. How long for the carve time? So yeah, about 3 hours on that project and all. And Blue Knight, hold on, I gotta see what I thought you did a dinner for two giveaway. I thought you did a dinner for two giveaway. And he puts LOL at the end of it, so there's an inside joke or something that I'm missing, or he might be serious. No, I never did a dinner for two, but if that was an inside joke or something that I'm missing, it's going, shoo, hey Archie, right over my head. Let me know. But because it just went right over me. But yeah, so uh I hope you guys and girls, got something out of this, talking about uh, just kind of showing you the way that I use my component tree, and how I build those components up to its finished piece. And again, if I needed to, like someone said, hey, if I change something down here, if I change something down here, will it update what's up here? And no, basically, if I were making a change in my handle, uh you know um if I step back here, this is my baked handle here, I would step back to my original if I had to make that change and make those adjustments. And then with that adjustment, I would build the component in this level, and then I would recopy those up in here and rebake them, add it to these two components because those aren't part of the handle. All I'm doing is replacing this one. And then once that gets replaced, then I'm coming up and baking that together, adding this next component back to it. I'm not deleting these components. I'm only getting rid of the handle because I've made just a change in the handle, but all my other steps are still intact. So all I have to do is when I recreate that change, just copy and bake that together in that next level, and then all I'm doing is just taking and just moving these back up, getting rid of what doesn't belong, and all. So it's a way to step back, but unfortunately, no, it doesn't update as you go. That would be cool if it did, but it doesn't. So and all. So I use my component tree as a stair step to get to the finished result. Some people just create their entire model in one level, and things and stuff, and that's great. Nothing wrong with that at all. But I use mine as kind of a stair step for each little element that's getting added to that model. It's a different level, and that way, if I did have to backtrack, I could easily without having to start from scratch. Right, right, right. Um, right. Can you copy and paste to the other layers? So yeah, so now these are levels in your component tree. You have levels in your layers. Like for instance, my layer one is my model handles, and everything, and I can copy and paste them into other layers, and move them. Like in my 2D view, if I have a model selected, I can copy that to a layer. Oh, here, let me get rid of your question so you can see my bottom of my screen there. But on that, I can copy it to a layer. I can move it to a layer. I can move it to a different sheet. If I was cutting this out of multiple sheets of material, I could copy it to the other side because it's a two-sided job, or just move it to the other side. In this case, we're talking layers here. So, I can copy or move that, to different layers and all and everything. and you know, all that wonderful jazz. So yep, sure can. Let's see here, trying to put you on the spot. There you go. Let's see here. Great information. See y'all next week. Lots of good food for thought and tips and all. Crystal, no video on cutting out or finishing. Right now, Crystal, I don't have a plan on that, but what I will do is if I do an in the shop on this one, um, I will announce that on Spindle TV's training video, Spindle Training Videos page on Facebook. Spindle TV's page, Spindle Training Videos page on Facebook. I'll announce that, and we'll do an in the shop, carve on that. Probably won't it won't be the full 3 hour carve. It'll probably be finishing up, a carve on one of them and have the other one done. But um, I haven't planned one out for that yet. But we're probably there probably will be. Most likely and everything, but I haven't planned on it yet. So if I do, I will announce that and put the link to that live event in there and everything. But yeah. So all right. Well, listen, and once again, thanks for answering my question on the round over bit. See you next week. All right. Thanks, William. All right, everybody. I want to thank you for joining me. I don't know why I turn like a pale green when I back up because I get close to that. I'm all flushed out here. But until next time, I'll see you soon. Bye now.